welcome to my channel. My name is Erica, and today's video is going to be episode 4 of a true crime series I'm doing here on my channel, True Crime in Oregon. Now, I've always been very interested in true crime, and I am from the state of Oregon, so I thought it would be really interesting to combine these two things. Now, I do try to get these videos up the first Sunday of every month, but this month and last month were a little hectic, a little busy, so I wasn't really able to do that. And I've decided that in the months to come, I'm just going to try to pick a week that's calm in my life so that I can research the case, compile my notes, and then sit down and film the video. But they will be coming up on a Sunday. Just not sure exactly which Sunday, but I'll give you plenty of notice as to which Sunday these videos will be coming up on my channel. Now, this case is about Randy Woodfield, also known as the I-5 killer. And the I-5 is a freeway that runs from Washington through Oregon into California. And from October of 1980 through February of 1981, Randy went on a murdering, robbing, sexual assault rampage along the I-5 corridor. He had crimes in Washington, into Oregon, into California. And as I was researching this case, I came across 2 really well done documentaries that I will have linked in my description box all about this case. There's a lot of key players that are interviewed in the documentaries, people that took part in his investigation, people that knew Randy from his past. So I highly recommend, if you want more information about this case, more than I'm going to be able to give you in today's video, definitely check out those documentaries. There's also a movie that was done, I believe it was a Lifetime movie, called The Hunt for the I-5 Killer. That was also a really well done movie with a lot of information about this case. I'm going to try my best to find a link to that movie as well and put that in my description box. But the majority of the information that I'll be giving you guys in today's video came from this book right here. This is The I-5 Killer by Ann Rule. Now, Ann Rule is a famous true crime author, and I have gotten information for my other true crime videos from Ann Rule books, the one I did about Diane Downs and also the one that I did about Jerry Brudos. She does such a good job of giving a lot of very detailed information in her books. And the thing that I love about her books also is that she's very sensitive about the victims, very sensitive towards the victims' families, but does do just an amazing job of giving a lot of very detailed information. So if you want more information that I'm going to be giving you guys today, I'm giving you a lot of information out of this book, but I had to kind of tailor it down or we'd be here for 8 hours. I highly recommend checking out this book, and I will find the Amazon link to this book and put that in my description box as well. Now, as with all of my other true crime videos, I want to give a very huge disclaimer here. Viewer discretion is absolutely advised. I'm going to be detailing some very violent sexual crimes, some very grisly murders. So please be aware of that and do not have young viewers around while you're watching or listening to this video. So without any further ado, let's get into the case of Randy Woodfield, also known as the I-5 killer. Randall Brent Woodfield was born December 26, 1950 in Salem, Oregon, to Walter Jack Woodfield and Donna Jean Woodfield. He was the youngest of 3 children, having 2 older sisters, and Donna Jean and Jack were just thrilled when Randy came along. They felt like their family was finally complete. They had their 2 older girls and their beautiful, happy, dark, curly-haired, bouncing baby boy. Randy was raised in a very loving, upper-middle-class family. Jack had a job for over 30 years at the Pacific Northwest Bell Telephone Company. And Donna Jean was a stay-at-home mom for the majority of Randy's life. She took a job as a clerk in a local drugstore when he was in middle school. The Woodfields lived in Salem, Oregon for about 1.5 years after Randy was born, moving to Corvallis, Oregon, where they lived for 2 or 3 years, until they finally settled in a small coastal town in Oregon called Otter Rock, which is very close to Newport, Oregon, which is a more well-known coastal town here in the state of Oregon. As Randy and his sisters continued to grow, the Woodfields were really seen as the perfect all-American family. All 3 kids were beautiful, they were very well-mannered, they were very intelligent, and they were very well-liked amongst the community members. And Randy, at a very early age, started to show a lot of talent for sports. He became a very good athlete very early on in his life. And even though Jack, his father, worked really long hours and was away from the home most often, he did his best to coach and tutor Randy in sports as often as he could. But really, Randy was raised by his mother and his 2 older sisters. And that wasn't always easy for Randy. He had a lot of jealousy towards his sisters because they were older than he was. They had a lot more freedom and independence, could kind of come and go as they pleased, whereas Randy would get stuck home alone with a babysitter a lot of times. He couldn't stand that. And rather than understanding that they had this independence and freedom because they were older than he was, he really focused in on their gender. He felt like women could just do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted to, had all the power in the world. And that really bothered him. And Donna Jean was the one that would typically punish Randy if he got a toe out of line, which she wasn't physically abusive to him. I mean, she basically like ground him or take things away from him. But because Randy always wanted to be the perfect child for his mother, he would have a lot of resentments towards his mother when she would punish him. Donna Jean really emphasized the fact that social graces were very important, that popularity was very important, and that he always needed to be a good boy. But just like any other normal child, Randy had a lot of natural curiosities about the birds and the bees and about sex. And Donna Jean made it very clear that that was not ever going to be discussed in the Woodfield household. She would say things like, you can find out about all of that stuff when you go into high school. So Randy had this kind of strange dichotomy going on in his mind and in his feelings. He wanted to be this good, perfect child for his mother, but he also wanted to be a normal child too. And so he kind of took matters into his own hands. And he started going around the town of Otter Rock, later into grade school, into early middle school, and exposing his genitals to women around the community. He felt like he was subconsciously getting back at his mother, and he loved to see the shock on these women's faces when they would see his exposed genitals. Now, because Otter Rock is a smaller town, he was recognized pretty quickly and he was caught. And the authorities sat down with Randy and his parents and had a very stern conversation about this. But because Randy was such a huge athletic talent already in his life, and because they kind of had the attitude of boys will be boys, they just kind of let it drop. They kind of just swept it under the rug, and nothing was ever really done about him exposing himself. Now, as Randy entered into Newport High School, he was known across the state as an athletic god. Initially, it was just in the community of Newport, but as he went through high school, the whole state of Oregon was aware of who Randy Woodfield was. He played baseball, basketball, track, and football. And people were just amazed at him. Like, he'd be right in the middle of spring training for football and also be the captain of the track team at the same time. And that really wasn't super common back then. He made the all-state football team both his junior and senior year, and then he was an all-state honorable mention for basketball his senior year as well. He was very good looking, had a very nice athletic physique. He was very popular, had a ton of friends, was kind of known as the life of the party, and started dating tons of different women in high school. But he preferred to date girls that were considerably younger than he was. He felt that they were more adoring, paid more attention to him, or just kind of a little bit more gaga over him than girls that were closer to his own age. And when he graduated from high school in 1969, the world really should have been his oyster. I mean, there were tons of universities that were hard after Randy to have him come play football for their school. But in the fall of 1969, he ended up enrolling in a community college, the Treasure Valley Community College in Ontario, Oregon. And things just started to go south for Randy. His grades started to slip. He was a C average student at best. And he started doing weird criminal things, like he would break into other students' dorm rooms and steal things from them, like cassette tapes or clothing. But he was still dating tons of different women in college. One in particular was a girl named Sharon McNeil. They dated each other for several months, which Randy wasn't really known to do that. He just kind of date girls for a week or two here and then go to another one, date one for a week or two. So the fact that he got so serious with Sharon was really kind of surprising to his friends and family. But after a while, Sharon just got tired of his two-timing and his very possessive, controlling, over-the-top behavior. So she broke up with him and absolutely broke his heart. And in August of 1970, Randy went and broke into the McNeil home and totally trashed Sharon's bedroom. And he was arrested and charged with vandalism and breaking and entering. But there really wasn't enough evidence, they said, to really tie him to the crime. So he avoided a jury trial and was just kind of let go. Now, Randy also started to expose himself out in public in Ontario. And when law enforcement caught him, rather than dealing with it, rather than charging him with anything, they just encouraged him to move on to a different school. So he did kind of bounce around for a little while until in 1971 through 1973, he moved to Portland, Oregon, and went to Portland State University. At Portland State University, he did major in health education, and he became an amazing football player for PSU. He really felt that football was going to finally give him the big break of success that he was looking for, and he kind of settled down a little bit. He was doing much better in school. He was working part-time, so he was really starting to pursue his goals at this point. This was also the time in Randy's life where he became very religious. He started going to church. He was attending Young Life functions. He was writing a lot of letters back home to Otter Rock, to his friends and family, letting them know that he had found the Lord. And even though he was claiming to be a very religious person, this is when he started to expose himself again in public. And because Portland is such a large metropolis city, he got away with it for a lot longer than he had in his past. But in August of 1972, he was finally caught and arrested for indecent exposure. He was convicted but served a suspended sentence with no probation. In June of 1973, he was arrested again for indecent exposure. He was sentenced to a few months in jail, which he did not serve, and 1 year's probation. And yet again, he was arrested for indecent exposure and was sentenced to 5 years probation. However, he didn't follow up on that, and the authorities didn't force him to either. And Randy was arrested 2 more times for indecent exposure. But at this point, law enforcement took him at face value that he would never do it anymore and that he just wanted to devote his entire life to football. On February 20th, 1974, was when Randy Woodfield finally got his big break in football. He was drafted in the 17th round to the Green Bay Packers. So of course, he moved to Wisconsin and started practicing with their traveling team. But that didn't go very well. He wasn't on the team for very long. They cut him very quickly. Now, his excuse is that he really wasn't able to show his athletic talent for the Green Bay Packers. They were basically just using him as a tackling dummy. But upon further research of what happened here, he was continuing to expose himself in Wisconsin. And the Green Bay Packers, rather than dealing with this with law enforcement, basically just cut him from the team and told him to get lost. Now, he did go play for another farm team, a semi-pro farm team in Wisconsin, but I believe that he was continuing to expose himself, and so they also cut him from the team. So in the late part of 1974 was when he moved back to Portland. His family was really hoping that he would go back to Portland State University and get his degree. But rather than doing that, he took a job at an electronics store and moved in with a really good buddy from college. In the early months of 1975 is when things took a very violent turn in Randy's life. He was frequently going to a local park in Portland, Oregon, and accosting women at knife point. He would walk up behind them, hold a knife to their throat, demand that they give him all of their money, and then force them to perform oral sex on him. Now, fortunately, all of these women were able to get away, and they did go and report these crimes to the local police department. And the police started to investigate the park, trying to look for Randy, but were never really able to find him. So they did start a sting operation. They had a female officer go to the park and pose as a decoy, and she was successfully able to lure Randy in. He did the same thing to her that he did to these other female victims. He held her at knife point, demanded that she give him all of her money, and right before he started to force her to perform oral sex on him, the police swooped in, arrested him, and took him down to the local jail. Now, ultimately, he did face trial, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for aggravated robbery, although none of the sexual abuse charges stuck in that trial. Now, he was not an ideal prisoner by any stretch of the imagination. He could not stand the female guards that were at the prison. He felt that it was very inappropriate for females to be guarding a male prison. He was also very difficult to deal with in his sex abuse therapy. He did not want to be telling his therapist anything about his sexual fantasies. He felt like it was none of her business. He did continue to work out quite often in prison, so his already impressive athletic physique became even more noticeable. And he was frequently writing women while he was in prison. All kinds of women, women from high school, women from college. At one point, he was in a pretty significant relationship with a 17-year-old girl while he was in prison. And unfortunately, he was paroled after 4 years in prison and was put on probation. He was sent back to Portland, Oregon, and was under the supervision of the Clackamas County Probation Office. Randy then became very hard to keep track of because he was moving around constantly. He was given a gold VW Bug by his parents, and so he was able to drive now and would just take off and go all over the place. He started to reconnect with all of his former friends, especially his female friends, kind of trying to like relive his glory days. He did go back to the electronics store that he worked at prior to his arrest, but he didn't stay there for very long. And then he started tending bar. That was his new focus. He was going to go to school to become a professional bartender, become the best bartender that ever lived. He did have several jobs at different taverns around Portland. He ended up working at the Fawcett Tavern, where he ended up robbing it of $3,000, but there was not enough proof, I guess, to really press charges against him. It's like the owner and his fellow co-workers knew that he'd stolen it, but they didn't ever really do anything about it. And this was when he really began to pursue as many women as he possibly could. Total ladies' man. Every time he would attend a party or a social function, he would have some pretty girl in his arm, and usually quite a bit younger than he was. He was very possessive, very obsessive. He would shower them with love and affection very early on. And most girls that were closer to his age were kind of freaked out by that. They kind of thought he was a real weirdo. Younger girls seemed to be a lot more interested in that, or a lot more impressed by that. So the majority of the women that Randy was dating were all younger. And again, he was not ever really with one person for any real length of time. He might convince somebody that he was, but typically, even if he was dating someone who she thought he was dating seriously, there was at least 3 or 4 other women that he was dating behind her back. Now, in December of 1980, Randy moved into a rental room in the home of Arden Bates in Springfield, Oregon. She was a single mother of a 6-year-old little boy. And at first, Arden thought Randy was amazing. She didn't really understand where he got his money from, because at this point he was unemployed. He was getting a small stipend from unemployment because he'd been fired from his tavern job for stealing the $3,000 that nobody ever did anything about. So she was kind of curious how he was getting all of his money, how he could afford to lavish these girls that he was frequently bringing over with flowers and perfume and gifts and whatnot. But she really did like Randy. I mean, most people that knew Randy really liked him, and she was really happy to have him living there. He was always on time with the rent. He kept his room sort of cleaned up. Didn't really have any like personal drama going on in his life. And he would frequently babysit her 6-year-old boy. So it was a really nice arrangement for her to have him there. Now, on December 30th of 1980, Randy met the woman of his dreams, Shelly Jansen, at a bar in Eugene, Oregon. They were both there just having some drinks. They met, started talking, and just fell head over heels in love with each other. At least that's what Shelly thought about Randy. Randy was still dating other girls behind her back. But Shelly was just absolutely smitten with him. He was 30 years old, she was 22, and she just thought he was the best thing that ever happened to her. But unfortunately, she was going to school in New Mexico. So she was just home for the Christmas holiday, New Year's holiday. So shortly after they met, she had to go back to New Mexico. But he started writing her these long, romantic, poetic letters, and just really captured her heart. I mean, she was just head over heels in love with him. He was even telling his friends, his parents, and his sisters that he had met the girl of his dreams and that they were going to get married. And they dated each other into 1981. In February of 1981, Randy actually called Shelly up and said, I can't stand this anymore. You got to quit school and you got to move back here. We can maybe move to Portland or live in Eugene or whatever, but we've got to be together. So Shelly was just thrilled to finally be able to leave school behind. She packed up her car, loaded it all up, and started driving back to Oregon, but had no idea the mess that she was going to be driving herself into when she arrived. On October 10th, 1980, the body of 29-year-old X-ray technician Sherry Ayers was found in her Portland, Oregon apartment. She had been raped, she had been bludgeoned in the head, and she had been stabbed repeatedly in the neck. Now, she was a former classmate and girlfriend of Randy's from Newport High School. And when Randy was released from prison in 1979, she helped him plan a very lavish, extravagant 10-year high school reunion party. On November 27, 1980, the bodies of 22-year-old Darcy Fix and 24-year-old Doug Altick were found in her Portland apartment. They were found both bound with athletic tape, and they'd both been shot execution style by a .32 caliber revolver. Now, Darcy happened to be an ex-girlfriend of one of Tim's former roommates, and they had just broken up a couple months before. And when Tim told Randy that they had broken up, Randy was just infuriated with Darcy. He acted like Darcy had broken up with him and not with his friend, even though Tim told him that he and Darcy were on very friendly terms. It was totally fine. They just kind of moved on with their life. Randy was furious with Darcy and had a total vendetta against her. Now, Randy was questioned for Sherry's murder and also for Darcy and Doug's murder. He was very evasive. He refused to take a polygraph test. He refused to give any kind of DNA evidence. But after the investigation went on, they just were not able to find enough physical evidence or any kind of evidence really to tie him to these murders. On December 9th, 1980, Randy walked into a Vancouver, Washington ARCO station and robbed it at gunpoint wearing a fake beard. On December 13th, 1980, Randy robbed a Eugene, Oregon Baskin-Robbins at gunpoint with a piece of athletic tape over the bridge of his nose. The next day, on December 14th, 1980, Randy walked into an Albany, Oregon Arctic Circle and robbed it at gunpoint, absolutely terrifying the two 18-year-old girls that were working behind the counter there. On December 21st, 1980, Randy walked into a Church's Fried Chicken restaurant just outside of Seattle, Washington, and forced the 25-year-old woman who was closing down the restaurant by herself to undress, where he fondled her breasts and then robbed the cash register at gunpoint. That same night, he walked into a Baskin-Robbins in Bothell, Washington, wearing his fake beard and athletic tape over his nose and robbed it at gunpoint. On January 8th, 1981, he went back to the ARCO station in Vancouver, Washington, robbing it again, forcing the woman that worked there to expose her breasts to him. On January 11th, 1981, he robbed a grocery cart market in Eugene, Oregon, coming away with only $35. On January 12th, 1981, Randy walked into the Central Market in Sutherland, Oregon, robbing it at gunpoint, of course wearing his fake beard and the athletic tape across the bridge of his nose. He walked up to the 20-year-old woman that was standing behind the cash register and forced her to put all of the cash into a bag that he'd brought with him. Then he shot her in the shoulder. He then made her lay face down on the floor as he fled the scene, but fortunately she was able to get up and see him leaving, and this was the first time he was spotted in the golden VW Bug that his parents had given him. On January 14th, 1981, Randy happened to be in Corvallis, Oregon, and he approached the front door of the Green family home. Mary Sue Green, who was 10 years old, and Megan Green, who was 8 years old, were home alone. Their mother had gone about 5 minutes away to a local health club to work out for about 45 minutes. This is something she did pretty often. And Randy made up a story that his car had broken down and that he really desperately needed to use a phone. And because he looked so normal, very attractive, very athletic build, the girls felt like they were safe to let him in. So he did come into the home, pretended like he used the phone, said that the line was busy, and could he please sit on the couch with them and watch some TV? And of course, the girls both said no, our mother would not allow that to happen. No way, you're gonna have to leave. At this point, he pulled out his silver .32 caliber revolver and forced both girls into the bathroom. He then made both girls undress, and then he made both girls perform sexual acts on him. Randy then threatened both girls to stay in the bathroom. He said if they left the bathroom, he was going to shoot both of them, and then he fled the scene. Now, their mother arrived home shortly thereafter, and the girls were absolutely hysterical, absolutely terrified, and their mother could not believe that this had just happened to them. So, of course, she did call the police department. They sent some police officers to the home, and both girls, only 10 and 8 years old, gave very good, very detailed, very accurate descriptions of Randy Woodfield. On January 18th of 1981, Beth Wilmot and Sherry Hull, both 20 years old and best friends, were just beginning to start their janitorial shift at the Transamerica office in Salem, Oregon. This was a job that they had weekly, cleaning these offices. When Randy Woodfield walked in, wearing the fake beard as his disguise, of course, with the athletic tape over his nose, and forced both girls at gunpoint into an inner office. He then made both girls undress. He sexually assaulted both of them, forced them to perform sexual acts on him, and then shot both girls in the head execution style with a .32 caliber revolver. Sherry Hull was killed pretty much immediately, but Beth Wilmot was able to crawl out of that inner office to one of the main offices and call the police. She also was able to see Randy leaving in the gold VW Bug. The next night, on January 19th of 1981, Randy robbed a skating rink in Vancouver, Washington at gunpoint. On February 3rd, 1981, Randy walked into a Burger Express restaurant in Redding, California, and robbed the place at gunpoint. He then took the 46-year-old woman and the 18-year-old woman that were both working there at the time into the bathroom. He sexually assaulted the 18-year-old woman and then forced both women to perform sex acts on him. He then bound both women with athletic tape and fled the scene. Later that same evening in Redding, California, 12-year-old Kristen Jarvis came home after watching a basketball game at her local middle school, super excited to chat with her mom and 14-year-old sister, Janelle. She started calling out to them and nobody answered her. So she walked up the stairs, entered her mother's bedroom, and found both her mother and 14-year-old sister had been shot to death in varying states of undress and were bound with athletic tape. And finally, on February 15th of 1981, the body of 18-year-old Julie Reitz was found on the stairway of her Beaverton, Oregon home by her mother. She had just turned 18 2 days before, and the day before, on February 14th, she had attended a Valentine's Day party with Randy Woodfield. She had been raped and shot at point-blank range in the head. So here we have a series of very violent crimes happening all along the I-5 freeway in Washington, Oregon, and California. And that is why Randy was dubbed the I-5 killer, because all of these crimes happen very close to exits, just right off the I-5 freeway. We have sexual assaults. We have people being robbed at gunpoint. We have stabbings. We have shootings. We have shooting deaths. And the fortunate thing about the situation, if that can even be said here, is that the eyewitnesses and the victims that survived these crimes went immediately to their local police departments and gave very accurate, detailed descriptions of what Randy Woodfield looked like. That he was tall, that he was big, built like an athlete, that he was attractive, good looking, had dark curly hair, had brown eyes, and would typically wear a fake beard and a piece of athletic tape across the bridge of his nose as a disguise. And so sketches were made of what this criminal looked like at all these varying police departments. And another fortunate thing about the situation is that these police departments started to talk with one another. These police officers were chatting about, hey, this is going on, and well, this is going on here. Oh my gosh, well, this is going on there. And oh my goodness, it's going on clear up there, you know? So they were all talking with each other and sharing information with one another. The difficult part, though, was when the investigation first started going. There was kind of like a turf war among the police departments. Like the police department in Eugene was like, no, we are taking over this investigation. We're going to take credit for all of it. And then the police department in Redding, California said the same thing. And then a police department in Washington was saying the same thing. But fortunately, there was this amazing lead investigator named Dave Komanek that worked at the Marion County Sheriff's Department in Salem, Oregon. And he was the lead investigator of the Beth Wilmot and Sherry Hall shootings in Salem, Oregon, in the Trans-America office. And he and his wife kind of took Beth in as she was recovering from her shooting. She was from Spokane. She didn't really have a lot of family in Salem. So they just took her in and they became very close with her. And Dave Komanek was like, I'm taking this very personally. Like he had like a personal vendetta to find out who this guy was that was creating all this carnage in 3 different states. And so he just decided, you know what? I'm taking over this whole investigation. Fire me. I don't care. I'm taking over. So they started to obviously investigate all of these different crimes and go and talk to all these different eyewitnesses. And they were hearing Randy Woodfield's name be brought up over and over and over again. And at first they were like, well, he doesn't really fit the mold, because they looked into his criminal background, just kind of a cursory looking into his criminal background. And they did find that he'd been in prison for 4 years, but those charges were just aggravated robberies. There was no sexual abuse charges at all. But as they started to dig a little bit deeper into his life, they did start to see the exposure charges and then the other sexual abuse charges that had gone on throughout his earlier life. And Dave was thinking, you know, this might be the guy. But whenever they would go and talk to people about Randy, they would get a pretty good account of who he was. You know, that he was very popular, very funny, a very good athlete. That was something that they learned right away, that he had, you know, almost played professional football. He'd been known throughout the state of Oregon for his athletic prowess. And so it was just kind of confusing for them. They just really weren't sure. But the more they talked to the women that knew Randy Woodfield, they kind of started to get a more accurate picture of him, that he was very possessive, very obsessive, that he had some kind of sexual issues, that he would primarily just date women that were quite a bit younger than he was. And they also were able to tie him to 18-year-old Julie Reitz, that they'd actually dated for a while, and obviously had also attended the Valentine's Day party together, and that he'd also dated Sherry Ayers, the very first body that was found in October, and that he knew Darcy Fix and Doug Altick. I mean, they just found out the whole entire story here. And so Dave was like, I really think this is our guy. So they reached out to his probation officer that was actually up in Portland to find out where he was living. And the probation officer said, you know, I don't really see him or talk to him much, but the last I heard, he was living in Springfield, Oregon. So they went to Arden Bates's house where Randy was renting the room. And they sat down with her and they talked to her about Randy. And she said, you know, he's a great guy. I don't really understand where he gets his money from because he doesn't really ever have a job. And she knew that he'd gotten fired from that tavern and whatnot. And she did know a little bit about his criminal background, but not as much as she should have known, or she probably never would have rented the room to him. But she did say that Randy was coming and going an awful lot, and that he had a lot of young women coming to the house with him to like spend the night. She also said that he did have a girlfriend, Shelly Jansen, that was coming back from coming to live with him from New Mexico, but that he had all these other girlfriends behind her back. And so Dave's like, okay, well, let's keep digging a little further. So they asked Arden for a copy of her phone records. As Dave started to look through the calls that were being made, he was totally blown away. Randy had made dozens of collect phone calls, charging the phone calls back to Arden Bates's phone at her house from all over the place, Washington, different areas of Oregon, into California. And as he really looked at it, all the dates matched perfectly with the crime dates. So he had basically put himself at the crime scene by his phone records. Ultimately, there was 2 searches of Randy's room. He was there for both searches. The first one was pretty cursory. They didn't dig real deep into his belongings, but they did find a pretty large container of athletic tape, which they confiscated. And up to that point, Randy was super chill, really relaxed, like, hey, yeah, just shooting the shit. Like, yeah, let's go ahead, look through my stuff. And as soon as they found that tape and took it, he got real rude, real nasty, real surly with the detectives. Now, what Dave knew and what Randy didn't really know at this point is that you can always match athletic tape back to its source. And when they found all these rolls of tape, especially there was like 2 or 3 that had some used on the roll, Dave was like, oh, come on, bingo. I'm really hoping that this tape matches the tape that we found on his victims. And ultimately, it did do that. The second search was a much more involved search. When Dave and the other officers arrived, however, Randy had burned something or several things, who knows, in his fireplace. And Dave's like, oh man, we're not going to find any evidence now. But during the second search was when they found a bullet and some shell casings from the .32 caliber revolver. So they were finally able to arrest Randy Woodfield. Now, initially they arrested him on parole violation charges because of course it took them a while to get all the ballistic evidence and all the proof that they needed against Randy, and they didn't just get that immediately. So Dave had him taken up to the Marion County Police Department in Salem, Oregon for interrogation. So Dave gets up there, he's sitting down chatting with Randy. Randy's being super elusive, refusing to take a polygraph test, refusing to give them any kind of DNA evidence. So Dave has this brilliant idea. He goes out and he calls Beth Wilmot, who is now back living in Spokane with her family, and says, I think we have the guy that shot you and killed Sherry. Can you please come down here and identify him in a lineup? And she did. She came down from Spokane. They had Randy and several police officers in a lineup, and she identified Randy immediately. Done, done, and done. So in the summer of 1981, Randy Woodfield finally stood trial for several different charges at the Marion County Courthouse in Salem, Oregon. Murder in the first degree, attempted murder, there were sodomy charges, and aggravated robbery charges. And the unreal part of this whole trial is, you guys know the actor Dick Van Dyke, who was in Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Well, his son, Chris Van Dyke, was the leading prosecuting attorney in Marion County, Salem, Oregon, during this time. So he prosecuted Randy Woodfield. I could not believe that when I found that out. And actually, Chris gives a couple of really good interviews in the documentary that I'm going to be linking, one of the documentaries that I'll link in my description box. You guys really need to check that out. And Beth Wilmot was the star witness for the prosecution. She got up on that witness stand and was very calm and very strong and very clear about exactly what Randy Woodfield did to her and her best friend Sherry on the night that he committed this heinous crime against both of these young women. And after 3 hours of jury deliberation, Randy Woodfield was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. Now, a few months later, he attended another trial, or was on trial in Benton County, Oregon, where they added some more charges and another 35 years to his sentence. So Randy Woodfield is currently serving out that sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary, which is a maximum security prison here in Oregon. Initially, he wasn't indisputably tied to Sherry Ayers' murder or the murder of Darcy Fix and Doug Altick that happened in October and November of 1980. But in 2001 and also in 2006, due to much more extensive DNA analysis, he was indisputably tied to those three murders. But they didn't add any further years onto his sentence. I think they felt because he had life plus 90 years plus 35 without the possibility of parole that they didn't need to do that. Now, in 1990, though, there was some more evidence that came out about Randy Woodfield and other crimes. And law enforcement really does think that he could possibly be tied to 44 victims, that he may have killed up to 44 people. But it was kind of unclear in the book that I read and kind of also the documentaries that I watched as to why they didn't really pursue that with him, like charging him with all of those murders. I don't know. And also in 1987, Randy Woodfield filed a libel lawsuit against Ann Rule for writing this book, the I-5 killer book that I got all the information out of to talk about in this video. The judge ended up dropping the charges because he felt like they were completely not based on fact. All the things that she talked about in her book were facts. She sat down with police officers, court testimony, all different kinds of police documents. She sat down with eyewitnesses, with family members, friends. So all the information that she gave, it wasn't biased. It was true facts about Randy Woodfield. So luckily, those charges were dropped against Ann Rule. Another little tidbit I wanted to add too is that Dave Komanek ended up passing away in November of 2012. But he was just an amazing investigator and worked with the Marion County Police Department, I believe, for more than 20 years, maybe even close to 30 years, and solved some really hard, really in-depth cases for the Marion County Police Department. He ended up moving to North Carolina with his wife, and I think he has 2 boys, and ended up retiring and loved to hunt and to fish and to coach, and he was a wonderful mentor. And I know he is very, very missed by his friends and family. He was a wonderful addition to the police force in Salem, Oregon. Now, of course, I want to give you guys my 2 cents. And this was a really hard book to read. I didn't realize initially that all of these crimes had taken place, that Randy Woodfield had done all of this. So really hard to read. Also, the sexual crimes that he committed, and that he'd forced women to perform sexual acts on him, especially a 10-year-old girl and an 8-year-old girl. I just was like, this guy is just sick, just sick. And the thing that I did think was interesting, though, when I was reading this book, is the fact that he didn't have the typical childhood as like Diane Downs did, or Jerry Brudos, or Keith Jesperson, the other videos that I've done. He didn't really have that kind of childhood. So, that kind of stumped me for a little while. Although, obviously he had some weird thoughts about women and the power that women have, and kind of relating that to his mother, and obviously started exposing himself at an early age to kind of get back at his mom, and it just kind of escalated from there. And I really feel like it escalated because nobody did anything about it. That's what I don't understand. When there's huge red flags and somebody's showing that they have a propensity for sexual violence, any kind of violence, deal with it. He should have been in therapy. He should have been really monitored and really, just watched like a hawk. That's what I feel. And also the fact that when he was arrested and put into prison and went through the trial, then was sentenced to 10 years, only served 4 years, and none of those charges had anything to do with his sexual crimes. I could not believe that. So, when Dave Komanek and all these other cops are looking through the criminal charges against different criminals, they don't even see that at first. They don't even see that Randy Woodfield had been accused and committing these sexual crimes. I just was like, oh my God. I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't have been able to find him any sooner, but I really feel like if the justice system had really done its job, maybe they would have. And maybe the people that lost their lives and were so horribly traumatized by this man, that none of that would have happened. I don't know. It's really hard to read these books. These are really hard videos for me to film. I don't know, man. I really do enjoy doing them, but also it's really hard because it just makes me so sad. I mean, the victims that suffered through all this and their family members, I mean, my heart just always goes out to the victims and their family members. Just awful. And of course, I want to know if you guys have ever heard of this case. We can chat about that in the comment section. My next video will be coming sometime on a Sunday in June. I'm not even sure exactly which case I'm going to talk about next. I think I know, but I'm not quite positive. But yeah, I am looking forward to doing the next one. It's a little bit daunting, but I really do want to thank you guys so much for taking time to sit down and listen and watch these videos. I know they're not easy to listen to, but I really do appreciate you guys doing that. And I really look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Please take care until the next time.